Hello, my name is Tom Nessler. Les Fraley and I are members of Plymouth Congregational Church. Like most, if not all members, I went to new member classes and was treated to a slideshow presentation on the history of Plymouth by Ray Becker. His story stuck with me, and he and I became friends over the years. Ray is a wellspring of historical knowledge about our church. Every time I sit in the sanctuary during Sunday service, I look at those wooden beams arching up to their peak. I think of Ray, and I marvel again at their place in the story of this church. As Ray has continued to tell his story, Les Fraley and I decided steps were needed to memorialize this piece of Plymouth history that Ray Becker has faithfully preserved and told and retold to each new member class. This show is the product of Ray's old pictures and our desire to preserve the narrative of Ray's story as only he can tell it.
Hello, my name is Raymond Becker. I am a native of Fort Collins, Colorado, and a lifetime member of Plymouth Congregational Church. I helped build this church from the ground up. I want to tell you the story how Plymouth got started and some of the people who played a part. At the turn of the 19th century, ethnic German farmers immigrated from the Volga region to Russia to America to escape religious and cultural oppression by Tsar Alexander II. They settled first in Nebraska, then they moved on to Fort Collins, Colorado in the early 1900s because of the promise of work in the expanding sugar beet industry and with the railroad that was expanding to transport sugar beets to markets. Many of these German Russians were poor and settled down in Andersonville and Buckingham subdivisions near the Cashlaputer River. When they began as a new church congregation, they met at people's homes to worship. They did not have an ordained minister to lead them, so they formed what was called the Brotherhood. One of the members would perform the service. The meetings grew to the point where there were too many people to meet at home, so they rented a place at 243 Linden Street. This is a building on the left. The meetings were held upstairs. That building is still there on Linden Street today. The congregation continued to grow. They decided to build a new church, bought property on the corner of Oak and Wedby Streets, and started building this church shown on the right at 201 Wedby Street in 1903. Their first ordained minister, Reverend Paul Burkhart, arrived at Springfield, Missouri, and began his ministry in November 1903. There were about 64 members at that time. They finished construction in 1904. The cost of the church was about $7,000 to $8,000. At this time, all of the services were in German. The membership continued to grow. A balcony was added in the church in 1916. The services continued to be in German until after World War II. The 1930s and early 1940s became a time of transition when English was used in the services more and more. Eventually, two separate services were conducted. One sermon was presented in English, and another different sermon was presented in German. Services were conducted strictly in English by 1951. By then, the congregation was comprised of 184 members. This is how the old church looks today. At one time, the city was considering tearing the church down. Fortunately, that did not happen, and our old church has been designated an official historical site and commemorated by this plaque affixed to the wall outside. In 1913, a home was purchased at 637 Wedby Street to be the parsonage. A new parsonage was built at the same site in 1928 for about $7,000. This is how that home looks today. Near the beginning of World War II in 1939, the congregation adopted the new name of Plymouth Congregational Church. We remained here on Wedby Street until 1955. At one of the annual congregational meetings in 1954, we decided we needed to expand and should either add on to the church here at Oak and Wedby, find another church somewhere, or build another church. A committee was formed. Fred Fite and Jacob Ehrlich were selected as members. They scouted around Fort Collins and proposed buying a lot between Prospect and Lake Streets. This is what the lot looked like, and this my father, Reinhard Becker, walking around the new lot and thinking of the building task ahead. We had a lot of people who objected to this choice. At that time, Lake Street was still a dirt street, and Prospect was only a 2-lane road. The new site was considered to be out in the country, and worse, next door to the corner of Shields and Prospect was a pig farm. Despite this, we decided to buy it, but lost some members with the move. The cost was $15,000, which in today's world would be very cheap. The old church at Oak and Wedby was sold for $14,000 in February 1955. For a year during the construction of new church, the Plymouth Congregational worshipped at Barton School on 703 East Prospect. Barton School was across the street from Lesher Junior High and is now the Discovery Center. The lot was purchased. Since it was just vacant ground, our people needed to clean it up. Most of the work was done by our members. A lot of our people were farmers, so this was done during the winter time when the farmers had time to donate and could come most days to work on the new church building. How much time they donated and how much work they did will be obvious as this story continues. Here the men of the church are burning off weeds and clearing the trash. This view is from Prospect Street looking north. This picture is taken approximately in the same place in 2010, soon after the latest renovation and remodeling project. There was a lot of clearing the lot by burning. Here the men are using propane gas delivered through the long tube to direct the flame while burning. This is how farmers burned weeds on their farms. This picture is facing west, and the house you see in the background belonged to Judge Kaufman. There were a lot of irrigation ditches crossing the property. You were not permitted to change the location or direction of any irrigation ditch, so we were required to keep these ditches in working order in same locations to preserve the water rights of other property owners. They were open ditches. That meant we needed to bury tiles and water pipes in place of the ditches to move the irrigation water through the church property. Here they are taking out a head gate from one of the open ditches. This is the front of our property along Prospect Street facing west. The farmers are getting ready to dig the trenches and tile all the ditches using cement pipe. This is the same view today. Here we are facing north along the west side of our property. The farmers and whoever else could help are digging this trench by hand with shovels. You can see the pieces of cement pipe alongside to be placed in the trench. This is the same view today. The pipe pieces were laid alongside the ditch to be placed when the digging is done. Surveying equipment was used to maintain the proper direction of water flow in the pipes. This is about the same view today. This is a picture of one of the trenches with a pipeline cemented in. The pipeline was then covered again with dirt by hand. Everything was done by hand. Ironically, these tiles never did move any more irrigation water. The only use made of these pipelines was recently, when the pipe on the west side of the education wing was used for a den by a mother fox. This is the lot looking to the north and east after the pipelines were in place and covered and the ground smoothed over. This is the same view today. We are now ready to build, and this was our groundbreaking ceremony. It was conducted Sunday, May 17th, 1955, a beautiful day. Twine was placed around to show where the church would actually be and where the rooms would be. Reverend Grasmick, middle, and a conference pastor to his right led the ceremony with a prayer. Also pictured is Hannah Ryan to the left of Reverend Grasmick, and to the far right is Paul Snidemiller, who was elected to be our building construction manager. Reverend Grasmick began the actual groundbreaking with the first shovelful, followed by Mrs. Fernbrook, a charter member of Plymouth Church. Her children included sons John, Jake, and Daniel, and a daughter Marie, and all of them attended Plymouth. She was later married again in a second marriage to Reverend Raddock, who was one of Plymouth's former pastors. Next was Mrs. Christine Miller, another charter member with Reverend Grasmick assisting. Lydia Ryan is on the left, and the Reverend's son Joseph, with his hand to his ear, look on. This is Elvin Ryan, the head of trustees. His father was Samuel Ryan. Elvin had a twin brother, Daniel, and Samuel helped build the church almost every day. This is Juanita Fite. She was president of the Ladies' Aid Society. And finally, this is Samuel Ryan. He was the head of the Brotherhood. Sunshine gave way to light rain, but the ceremony continued. This is Reverend Grasmick in the foreground. Behind him, wearing the black hat and blue coat, is Mrs. Fernbrook. The gentleman in the black suit and white shirt to her left is my father, Reinhard Becker. Harry Ryan is to the left, removing his hat, and Mrs. John Bame is next on the right edge of the picture. John Hoff is on the left edge, then Don Curbs, then Daniel Schmidt. Music was provided by Mrs. Grasmick using a portable organ. We hired Donald Moore, an architect from Denver, to draw the designs of our new building. This is the beginning of pouring the concrete walls of the basement that houses the furnaces, hot water heaters, and storage. In the lower left, looking northeast, are the cement footings showing the lawn equipment storage area and the sanctuary. These are the roof beams for the sanctuary. They were transported to Fort Collins on a flat railroad car. The farmers went down to the railroad station to pick up these beams. They are huge. To this day, I still do not know how they actually got these beams back on a flatbed truck. This is a group shot of all volunteer church construction crew seen in the previous two slides. From left to right, Reinhard Becker, Albert Frank, Dan Ryan, kneeling, Harry Ryan, Alex Winnick, John Triple, Donald Curbs, Alex Curbs, unknown, Elvin Ryan, front, Paul Snidemiller, back, Dave Snyder, Wilbur Triple, Jake Mill, and Reverend Grasmick. This is how the beams were erected. Here they are using a front-end loader from somebody's farm to raise the first one. This beam is the first arch at the back of the sanctuary. How they managed to get these arches up and in place without toppling any of them over, I still do not know for sure. Looking west, these are the two arches that were erected. Reinhard Becker is tying in the arches with braces. We did not have any big accidents, but Jake Mule was slightly injured when he rode up on the first ark being raised and he fell off. Luckily, he did not get hurt seriously. This picture of the arches shows you how big and high up they were. We did not have too many people who wanted to work up this high. It was a lot easier to look up from the ground than look down from above. Pictured are Reinhard Becker, Robert Snymiller, son of Paul, Sam Rhine on the ground. As the arches were put in place, a leveling rod was used to position them vertically, while others tied the ark in with braces. Up top on the left is Reverend Grassmick. Down on the lower portion is me, Ray Becker, and my father, Reinhard Becker, and the other gentleman up on the top is Robert Snymiller. Today you have to have a big crane lifting up these beams and holding them up while men fasten them into place. Here is Sam Rhine in a dark hat and Jacob Ehrlich taking advantage of the photo opportunity while the younger men, Ray Becker and Bob Steinmiller, worked up high. The new metal door frames are scattered about, awaiting installation. This is the raising of the very last beam. Looking north, this would be the front of the sanctuary and the face of the church on Prospect Street. Now all beams are up. These are the arches visible today inside the sanctuary. This is what the church looked like the day the cornerstone was installed. About a third of the decking for the ceiling has been put on. When the decking was put on, every board had to be clamped together to eliminate any space in between. When you are in the sanctuary, you can look up and see what a beautiful job they did. This was the building committee. From left to right are Paul Snymiller, Mr. Harvey, the mayor of Fort Collins, Dan Dumler, Jake Mill, Reinhard Becker, our head carpenter, and Reverend Grassmick. This is December 6, 1959, the day of the cornerstone ceremony. When we sold the old church on Oak and Wedby, we retained the right to remove the cornerstone, cut it in two, and use half the stone at the new church. Here on the left is Louis Helbert, our stonemason at the old church, removing a cornerstone. In the center, Reverend Grassmick and my father helped remove the cornerstone. The cornerstone was so large they had to take it to Denver because there was no one in Fort Collins able to cut it. Afterward, we took one half of the cornerstone for the new church, and the other half was placed back in the original church. At the bottom, the hole left from the cornerstone shows the thick brick composition of the walls of the old church. The old Germans built solid churches. Gathered to place the marble plaque in front of the cornerstone are Don Moore, the architect, Dan Dumler, Jake Mills, Paul Snymiller back, Reinhard Becker front, Reverend Grassmick, and Louis Albert. You can see the same marble plaque in the original cornerstone honoring our history today at the front entrance to Plymouth Church. Like many of our church events today, the congregational turnout was strong for the cornerstone ceremony. Now the roof is nearly complete. This is the front of the church. Remember that all this work is being done by members of our congregation, not hired contractors. This is looking down from atop the building to the east at the entryway and the east room for Sunday school, which now serves as our youth group room. Here the men are putting up the iron beams and metal trusses for over the fellowship hall. In the foreground is the kitchen area. The doorway was the outside entrance to the kitchen, facing south. It no longer exists. Here are the beams and trusses in the fellowship hall as seen from the back of the sanctuary. Also shown are the large windows of the fellowship hall. From this perspective, this appears to be the only time, past or present, that the trustees allowed a pickup truck to be parked inside the sanctuary. Here the workers are putting up the shake shingles and the flat roofs over the offices. There were not too many workers who wanted to get up on the steeply slanted roof. The car to the left was a 1938 Oldsmobile owned by Jake Mill. The car to the right was also an Oldsmobile that was my car. From this vantage point looking northwest, we see the face of the church emerging. The roof is now covered, and the stone face of the sanctuary wall is going up. Here is the same view today. On the west side of the church, the brick wall and support beams are put in place, followed by the shake shingles on the west-facing roof of the sanctuary. Here is the same view today. Just in case you might have forgotten, it was winter and not all work days were sunshine. Most of the work was done in winter-like weather, so there was always a propane heater inside. The workers would come down and warm their hands, visit a little bit, go back out, work some more, come down, and get warmed again. Here is the same view today. This is the front of the church almost completed. You can see from the sign that outside contractors were used to install heating, plumbing, electrical, and masonry work at the later stages of work. This is Plymouth Church after outside work was completed and lacked only having our name Plymouth Congregational Church affixed to the white exterior wall. At night we would work inside, painting and laying floor tile, doing whatever work needed to be done. At the bottom, Pete Deering is putting some finishing touches on the floor tiles in the sanctuary before installation of the pews. This is in the corner where the sound control equipment is now near the sliding glass door. The women of the church would always bring in refreshments, including German coffee cake, called Rivelkuchen or Grebel. They were always there to give us plenty of nourishment to keep us going. The picture on the upper left is the finished sanctuary on Dedication Sunday. On the right is Reverend Grasmick on Dedication Sunday. Colored glass windows were later placed in the skylights as a memorial by Jake Mill for his youngest son who died in an Air Force training accident. The sanctuary looked like this until a recent remodeling. In 1964, the congregation sold the parsonage on Webby Street and built a new parsonage. The property west of the church was purchased and construction began in 1965. I drew the blueprints for the design. Unlike the church, the parsonage was built by a construction company. The dedication of the new parsonage was on June 2nd, 1965. Like the cornerstone ceremony, the parsonage dedication ceremony brought out the congregation. The cost of the parsonage at that time was $35,000. In 1965, the value of our church building, parsonage, and property was assessed at $170,000. The newly built parsonage looks like this. Today it is used as a rental home for college students. The next major change at Plymouth was the addition of an education wing. This is the architectural drawing of the new wing, which now serves us as such today. The educational wing was also built by a contractor. In these photos, a crane is shown being used to lift and place the rafters. Think back to the front end loader propping up the large sanctuary beams. The crane was also used to lift materials to the workers on the roof. During the building of the church, all the needed materials and supplies needed for this construction of the sanctuary were carried up by hand, one bundle at a time. As you can now imagine, our church has deep roots in the history of Fort Collins. Plymouth exemplifies an American story, starting with immigrant Russian Germans with a desire for community and place. Our church community has sustained and grown through time by do-it-yourself independence of its congregation. When you sit in our sanctuary on any Sunday, look up and see those wooden arches raised by hard work and determination. We still do things that way. Welcome to Plymouth Congregational Church.